The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's edition of Payroll Question Time, April edition, a new tax year, a new outlook, new economic, potentially shrinking or recovering or growing. We'll find out. We're going to be talking about the new year we have ahead of us during today's episode of PQT. For those of you that are new, I know many of you are still joining as we open up the broadcast. There will be a number of opportunities today for you guys to get involved. We're going to be hosting 3 polls, so 3 lots of opportunities for you to put your fingers on the buzzers and give us your views on the questions that we pose. There is an opportunity as well, of course, for all of you to put your questions to our panel in the questions box. If you have a burning payroll question that you need an answer to, please do let us know. It doesn't have to be related to what we talk about today. If there's a challenge in your payroll operation that you would like the experts to come up with a response to, put it in the questions box. I will ask them in real time. So I challenge you all to challenge them if you can. Of course, we will be recording this session, so you don't need to take notes. We will send you a copy of the slides after the recording is over, and there will also be a survey we send to all of you at the end of the show. Please make sure, if you can, you take a look at that. That's your opportunity to let us know what you want us to cover in future sessions. And in fact, today's session has pretty much designed by you, because we've actually taken your feedback on board, and what we're going to be discussing today is very much based on the survey results that you filled in the past. So please do fill that in, and we'll cover anything you need us to in a future episode. Last but by no means least, I'm going to read out our legal disclaimer, which basically says the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries, and in some place takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Now, hopefully most of you will know who I am by now if you've joined a previous PQ2 episode. But for those that don't, my name is Nick Day. I'm the host of the Payroll podcast, so please do subscribe and check that out when you get a moment. I'm a Reward 300 member, and I'm founder of the payroll specialist recruitment company, JGA Recruitment. So if you need a vacancy help with, I'm the person to get in touch with. I've been in this industry now for over 20 years. I've known the panel here for all of that time pretty much. So let me welcome those to the show as well. From my left to right, I'll start with Simon Parsons, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. And Simon Parsons, Director of Compliance Strategies for Worx in the UK. I'm also a member of Reward 300. I have the Master of Science in Payroll Management. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, sit on a number of government panels and committees, and represent the IT industry as the payroll specialist group for the BCS.
Fantastic. And moving from my left to right, Mr. Richard George.
Yeah, very similar to Simon. I could just cut a couple of words out and replace them. Richard George, Director of Education Operations at the Payroll Centre. Also Reward 300, also sits on government panels, 35 years in the industry, and obviously heading up the largest face-to-face payroll training company in the UK.
You don't look old enough for 35 years, Richard.
I know, I started when I was 4. I was 4, Nick, when I joined the industry.
Super dry, keeping you young at heart. Andy Nichols, if you can introduce yourself, please.
I can't substitute those. So my background is payroll, but I've spent the last 10 years with a regulator, particularly focusing on helping payroll professionals, payroll software with automatic enrolment. And that's what I'm here for, really, the pension bit of payroll.
Fantastic. So for those of you that have pensions questions, there's an opportunity, of course, for all of you to put those questions in the box. You don't need to wait for us to start. If you've got a question, you've come onto this webinar for the panel to answer, get it in the box now. It gives me more opportunity to ask it to our panel sooner rather than later. So don't be afraid. Put it in there and I'll make sure they get asked as we go. Now on to today's topic discussions, which are, as you can see in front of you, the new tax year view, an outlook. Is it recovery or was it shrinking? A blended Class 1A and P11D cycle, the reliefs and investment zones impact, the national living wage increases. I know that's been a pretty hot topic in the social channels that I've been following. The future of pay and payroll trends. Pensions updates, where Andy will very much be bringing you all the latest in the world of pensions. And we're going to talk very briefly about the launch of the SD Worx Academy. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, stay until the end of the show. So let's jump into the first topic then, new tax year. Busy time for payroll professionals recently as they've been manically trying to get through year end. How's the outlook looking? We've got holidays in May, which are a new thing to negotiate, and we've got a whole new outlook. And depending on what side of the fence you sit on here, it's either shrinking and not so positive, or it's recovering and looking great. So I'm going to let Simon take the floor on this one. You can give us a bit of an overview on your outlook on the new tax year, Simon.
Yeah, it's been an interesting little cycle. So we've gone away from the 3 change national insurance and everything else. So hopefully we're all prepared for the new year, and hopefully some settling down than the prior couple of years of dealing with COVID, etc. But I guess there's an element of, does that impact us as an industry? Because is there any reason for us to be known that much? Plus, there are other implications, I'm sure we'll cover them, that may be impacting the means of pay and considerations as we go through. But on the economy, it's an element of what is it doing? In some ways, it's been predicted that we'll go through a rocky time. I think there's some press today to say that actually it's working out a little bit better than people thought. So the pound's gaining a little bit, etc. So I think the real test is maybe with some of our attendees to find out what's happening in their business really, and whether they think the future's looking good or bad. There's just some initial thoughts, Nick.
Fantastic. I know, Richard, you're always politically charged on these matters. What's your view on the outlook at the moment, sir?
I think, I guess, first of all, on that front, and obviously, as Simon said, it is a very strange sort of quarter coming up, especially when you look at what was said in the budget, but also how it's now looking. You know, there is a perception that July could be a real shape month, because the expectation of the reductions that are being seen wholesale should start hitting the UK in July. So especially when it comes to fuel, energy. And also there is obviously the big drive at the moment about, excuse the pun, around fuel costs versus wholesale. Given that wholesale diesel is currently the same as petrol, we're not seeing that, and we should be. So I think it's very volatile, but possibly in a good way over the next 3 months. I think from a payroll angle, however, obviously new tax year, very different challenges. Obviously last year it was the merry-go-round. Will they, won't they? Yes, they will, but they'll end up putting it back as they did. Where this year, obviously, we have a little bit more focus due to the freezes, which do make a significant difference. But I think it's more about this year, the management of business within payroll. So I will give you a couple of examples. Number one, I was at a shared services forum meeting this week, and far higher a percentage than I expected, and we're talking about big business here, are actually either at or talking about, for instance, 4-day weeks now, which makes a significant difference to modelling, pay, attendance, etc. But I think also on the back of that, just purely the variation in employment at the moment is probably a bigger fixture to the payroll industry than deducting tax and national insurance. I guess the only final aspect really is the, I guess, increased or convoluted benefit program that we're all going to be going through up till July because of, and we're going to talk about blended rates and such like as well. So a little bit more work where there normally wouldn't be, a little less work where there normally wouldn't be, but a lot of variant work that we don't usually or haven't seen in the past, I guess, is my...
Very nice. We're not going to jump into these bullet points you see in front of you on the slide in just a moment. Before we do so, Andy, a little bit of a pensions outlook anything we should consider or be thinking about before? I know we've got a pensions update later on, but keen to get your overview outlook on the pensions industry in particular.
Well, I mean, one of the concerns with the cost of living crisis, etc., was what will happen to people paying contributions. Will they start to cease membership or perhaps reduce their contributions, or will employers perhaps start being a bit naughty and not put people in role? But the information we can gather from various sources would indicate, including RTI, would indicate that actually that isn't happening, that people are still not choosing to reduce their contributions or opt out, and that employers are complying. So it's really good news. You know, that's good. That's good. It is good because that's your future.
Like good news.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the impacts on payroll managers then for holidays in May. You can see there 3 out of 5 4-day weeks in May are going, being impacted. Simon, tell us a little bit about how that may impact on payroll managers and the effects for them.
Well, yeah, it means the weeks are short. So from a practical point of view, we've got to squeeze everything in a little bit shorter. I mean, 2 of those were planned, and one of them has been planned, but not for so long because it relates to the coronation. But there are the impacts of what that means for the workforce in general, and then payroll. So we'll have the arguments of whether the coronation bank holiday is paid or unpaid, whether it's part of the 5.6 weeks or is it in addition. So we then go into effects of, are we talking about the statutory holiday entitlement, 5.6 weeks? Does that increase by a day? Doesn't have to, the law doesn't require it to, or whether that's increasing by a contract, where the contract states that bank holidays are in addition. So there's an element of what's your employer doing? Are you paying it? Are you not paying it? Is it allowed off? Is it not allowed off? Is it just a normal day or not? So there are some considerations for this month of what's happening. What happens with pro rata for starters, leavers, and so on. So there is that sort of payroll question of May's a strange time, especially as the tax year's just started. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a long weekend.
So there's a requirement there for payroll managers potentially to look at some of the HR or the employment contracts to understand what they need to do, what they don't, and don't take any assumptions on that front. So you need to be communicating with your HR counterparts here potentially to find out what's what. You've also got a point here about Rishi Sunak's maths proposal. Richard, if you wanted to, or Simon, if you wanted to bring that to life.
I'd start with Simon because I'm not sure what I wanted.
Simon, back to you.
Yeah, well, Rish is obviously promoting the teaching of maths. I guess the alignment there with what's that got to do with the payroll industry as well. We're all about maths, aren't we? But there's some concern that maths is sort of a bit of a forgotten or an unliked subject. So obviously there's a promotion. Equally, does that go into the industry's promotion of actually getting apprentices in and young people? Yeah, Rish is making maths study compulsory to the age of 18. I don't think that means you have to do A-level maths. I did A-level maths. I'm not saying I was any good at it, but I did A-level maths, or not. But and also the promotion of teachers in the industry, because a lot of maths teachers aren't, if I put it that way. Their degrees are usually in some other science, because those that have got maths degrees tend to do something else, which usually pays a lot more. So there's an element of how do you encourage that. But I think that's the reason, because it's a recent government announcement, and how that aligns with actually, does that affect us as an industry? Because we're all about maths, aren't we?
Yeah, very nice. Absolutely right.
Used to be, Simon.
Used to be.
Used
Maths
to be.
and tech now, isn't it?
It's all it's just a button now. Button. Yes.
We've had a couple of questions come in, which is great. So do keep those coming in. One is a little bit longer to read out than the other. I'm going to start with one which I'm going to try and answer if I can. It was in relation to a recent cyber attack incident that people may or may not be aware of. It's coming from Amanda. It just says, after the recent cyber incident, are the panel confident systems are protected and have robust plans in place? Something I've been discussing a lot in a lot of the articles and things I write is for payroll professionals need to be really aware that this is very much on the increase. Cyber attacks within payroll departments, you're going to see a lot more of this. So do everything you can to practice and run your due diligence in advance, because it's very likely that many people on today's webinar are going to be attacked at some point. In relation to the incident that Amanda's talked about here with relation to SD Worx. I obviously don't work for SD Worx. I'm aware of some of the responses to it. I know that their systems were temporarily offline due to some unauthorized activities in the hosted UK data center, but they did take immediate action. They still are in regular contact with all of their customers, I believe, to inform of the latest updates. All customers were paid in that period. But more importantly, for everyone that may be concerned about this, my understanding is that the forensic investigations by the experts, which they've launched, has now been finalised, and there's no indication at the moment that any data left the data centre. They have not been contacted by any identified attacker groups, and no publication on the dark web regarding this incident has been released either. So we're hoping that's all been managed. But I think there's a bigger thing to be aware of here, and that is that if you're working payroll, in the amount of data that you manage, which is often bigger than any other area of any other business, and whether it's an in-house payroll bureau or service provider, unfortunately, you are going to be ripe for potential cyber attacks in the future. So it's really will pay in advance, particularly of this new year's looking for new outlooks, to make sure that you have tested your protocols, that you're working very closely with your IT and CTO operations to make sure that you are protected as best you can be. But that's my understanding on the SD Worx cyber incident as far as I know it. I don't have any other further information to give. I don't think my panel do either, as far as I'm aware. So hopefully that answers your question, Amanda. We're going to run into another question, which is quite a long one. It comes in from Louise. It says, month 12, and brackets, the month we went live, close bracket, does not match what shows for month 12 on the HMRC gateway. This is the case for all 7 of our legal entities. This has, of course, resulted in an underpayment of PAYE showing on our account. I spoke to HMRC and the advisor tried to be helpful, but all I could do was request the FPS that they are using to be broken down to the employee level and sent to me in Excel format so I can investigate. The first FPS was sent with all employees having the change of payroll ID indicator box ticked, so we should not be having these issues. Can anyone offer any insight on the panel into why this happened so that I can explain to our finance teams? I have raised disputed charges, but HMRC can take months or even years to respond. I don't know if that all came through. If it did, if one of my panel would like to tackle that for me, please.
Simon, it's deja vu.
We had this last PQT, didn't we? Something very similar.
I can remember this conversation a month ago.
Yeah, it's one of my specialities, Nick, as chair of an organisation called Irene, which is in its original name comes from Inland Revenue Electronic Exchange Network, and it was the electronic exchange network of EDI filers originally, but now these days XML. So part of the RTI. The RTI system's not very well designed. So employer charge queries actually happen. The HMRC will say it's quite a small percentage. I think they'll say that's about 2% of employers have charge queries. So that does seem quite small. But when that's 1.6 million employers, actually that number's quite large. And many of the people even listening on to this discussion or the webinar today may have experienced what they call charge resolution cases. Usually it occurs because of duplication, inadvertent duplication, so and timing. So it's where HMRC thinks people have multiple employments. They can take a significant amount of time, but I say there are specialists out there that can assist. And generally the finger of blame is pointed at employers. As a representative of employers, I tend to point the finger back and say it's the poor design of the RTI system. But I'm sure Rich will be aware of it with a lot of your membership, I would thought, Richard. I'm aware of it, certainly as the chair of the Irene group, of it happening. And in fact, there is actually an article in the April bulletin. So the employer's bulletin that came out has a section called Employer PAYE Charge Queries and goes through various recommendations. I tend to take some of it with a pinch of salt. It's not overly accurate in what it says because it's given from a point of view from the HMRC side as opposed to you as an employer. But charge resolution case is the correct thing to do, but it's interesting. But I'm presuming this scheme was reported previously and it's changed, and it's quite a common point where things happen, even with the change of payroll ID markers. Don't know if you've got any other thoughts there, Richard, but I'm sure you come across this a lot.
Yeah, it's the same thing, isn't it? It's just it becomes an audit request, and the trouble is just how long that takes is the problem.
Yeah.
But it needs to be raised because it will hopefully at least stop the interest.
Yes.
It's a bit like most things. As soon as you escalate it, it pauses the case, which is really what you want to do more than anything else. It's a bit like, you know, if you get a parking fine and it's wrong, you have to contact them straight away and appeal it, because that stops the process and stops the time. So that's probably the key for you. It's just, you've got to be ready that it's a very slow process. I think it's just, you know, there's so many moving parts against a system that has only so much width, and therefore it can see one thing and not another. It can not see the thing it should have seen first and see the second one, which could well be the case, that it just isn't aware of the change, so it's therefore not enacting the marker correctly. There's just so many ways that there can be fluctuation, but then you're dealing with 9 billion pieces of data. So it's not exactly a small fry piece of kit.
Yeah, there's awkward people around in the world, Nick, as well, because, you know, I'm called by my middle name, and HMRC may get confused over that type of thing, especially when I change employer. I may have changed
It gives
address.
Louise a bit of confidence to know she's not the only one with this problem. As you say, we've tackled this a couple of times before. So I don't know, maybe there's confidence in numbers, Louise. You're not alone with this issue. That's why Richard mentioned deja vu. Interestingly, you've had a bit of deja vu with the coronation situation as well, of course, with the bank holiday last year with the Queen situation. So for those that are on that PQT, there's a little bit of deja vu involved in there. But do check those employment contracts to check whether or not that needs to be paid.
Yeah, I was going to say, the difference issue with the holidays is it's week after week. So there is a secondary issue, and that is resource. You know, I'm sure a huge number of people have booked a 2-week holiday that starts now, because you're getting 2 weeks off for 8 days holiday. So there's other aspects to it as well as the pay and rostering side, I think.
For those that hadn't worked that out, Richard, they're busy now leaving this show to go and fill in their holiday requests for
absolutely
Monday. Well, let's get everyone involved in the conversation as well. Let's run our first poll. I want to find out how the audience feel about entering this new tax year. Are they stable and confident, slightly uncertain, shaky and concerned, or extremely worried? Be really keen to find out what you all think. So fill in your answers into that poll. This is a good opportunity as well if anyone has any other questions they want to put to the panel, or wait for those questions to come back. I will obviously try and ask any questions you may have. So this is a really good opportunity for you to put any questions in the box, and I will ask my panel while waiting for those poll results to come through. And in fact, while we're doing that as well, so everyone else know, we're about to move into the blended Class A and P11D cycle stuff. We're going to be talking about the transition from paper to digital P11Ds, the introduction of blended Class 1As, and changes in filing processes and deadlines. I mentioned that because I know again that the blended Class 1A has been something that's been quite prevalent in social media chats, and people have a lot of questions around this area. So again, any questions you have around those transitions or those changes or that introduction, please put it in the questions box, and we'll ask our panel as we get to that section. Right, let's have a look at how this poll is looking and see if people are confident or concerned as we enter this new financial year. For those that are listening in audio only, the results are 57% say stable and confident, which is great to hear. 38% slightly uncertain, 6% shaky and concerned, and nobody whatsoever is extremely worried, which is really, really good news. I've come to yourself, Simon, any thoughts on these results?
Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? So stable and confident. I'm hoping so, because stability has kind of returned a little bit. So that's good to see. Although I think we've got some sweeping up to do, which you've kind of mentioned, which might give us a little bit of a bumpy road up ahead. But no, good.
Less chancellors and less prime ministers in 2023 than we've had in 2022. Great. Well, let's jump in then to our blended Class 1A and P11D section, and I'm going to come to you again, Simon. If you can just give us a bit of overview into what we need to know, and then we'll hand the discussion over for Richard's thoughts as well.
Yeah, sure. So it's probably a little bit of a reminder here, and also a bit of surprising news from February, which we've talked a little bit about before on the reporting of expenses and benefits. But for P11DB, and we've seen questions on social media going round, what is the rate applied for Class 1A National Insurance? Just a reminder, it's 14.53%. And some will be saying, well, that can't be right because they didn't get the benefit until January. Why is it 14.53? Because the secondary NI is 13.8%. Well, the rate is 14.53 because the assessment point is the end of the tax year based on the full tax year, no matter when you had the benefit. So you'll remember that originally 13.8% was the secondary Class 1 national insurance rate, so the Class 1A for 21-22. Then in 22, we went to 15.05, and then it dropped back down to 13.8 from November. So this blended rate is a combination of the both, which kind of transition us for the whole of 22-23 at 14.53%. So when you do any of your benefit calculations, you're not interested when they had the benefit. It's just, did they have a benefit in that tax year? In which case the Class 1A is 14.53, no matter when. And some may have be confused by that or be wondering what to do. And I've certainly seen a load of queries and questions about what rate they meant to use, and that can't be right. So those are the initial elements on the Class 1A part.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of those. So people wanting to calculate it monthly on the rates at that month seems to be the most common error. Unfortunately, it's right, but it's wrong in that respect because of, as you say, Simon, it's when it's returned and it's on the year. But there has been a level of confusion on those grounds. And to be honest with you, I don't think the remit from HMRC helped. It didn't state this. It just stated for directors, it's 14.53% for the year, and for P11D and obviously PSA the same. But it didn't talk about part year or how that should be treated, which is probably why there's been this level of confusion there.
Well, and taking that a stage further, as you mentioned it, Richard, is lots of people are trying to calculate an employee level Class 1A liability. So they kind of have something that they can play with for their GLs or costings and things like that. The reality is Class 1A isn't assessed at employee level. It's assessed on an employer.
Absolutely.
So you actually have to total up all the benefits for the year, no matter when they're given, and find the benefit tax value amount. What is going to be taxable. You take that value as a whole for the employer, apply 14.53 once. So if you do it individually, you'll lose it. It won't be the same because the rounding points are all different. So it's remembering that some of these are actually an employer liability on a total, not a total of individual liabilities. But each their own. People do a variety of things.
But I think also, there is possibly, I was going to say, there's possibly quite a tough conversation because, in a larger business, you would be forecasting, and you would certainly not have forecasted 14.53% cost. So I think there is an on problem or a bit of awareness required, because remember, this isn't till July, so we're still months away from it. So if people have a reasonably large PSA or P11D requirement, go on. I would say it could be time to have that conversation with finance to make sure they're aware of that variation. Sorry.
Any other considerations at all that we need to run through before we open up the release and investment zones impact section?
Well, yeah, we could talk a little about P11Ds, Nick, a bit more, but that was a bit of the shock from February employer bulletin that they announced that from 6th of April 23, no more paper forms could be submitted. And in fact, the message on the street is they're actually rejecting them now. So as agents or payroll people or benefit people send in the paper documents, they're getting them back in the post rejected. Because we may think, oh, from 6th of April, they're talking about the new year. They're not talking about the new year. They're talking about the old year. So 22-23 forms P11D cannot be sent in on paper. They now have to be electronic. And when do we know about this? February. So you've had 2 months notice for something that started a year ago. Those opinions have been expressed to the HMRC panels and groups, but I think this is a cost-saving exercise. They don't want to handle the paper anymore, and the ministers come out and told them to stop it, and so they have. There is a new mechanism for filing P11Ds online that's just opened, up to 500, but if you've got more than 500, you've got a bit of a problem. And even if you got close to 500, typing them all in by hand into some sort of HMRC solution might take you a bit of time.
Richard, anything to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. It's certainly a bit of a kick,
Right.
this one, I think, to a lot of people. So.
Well, Louise has just come back saying thank you to the panel. She said it's comforting to know that others are having the same issue. Hopefully something HMRC sorts out in the future. Absolutely right, Louise. Thank you for your question. Keep them coming in. Let's move into the next section then, the reliefs and investment zones impact. We're going to talk about the announcements and locations, the impact on northern UK businesses, and payroll considerations, the important bit here, and potential benefits. Richard, I wonder if I can start with you this time.
Yeah, so it obviously moved on a bit further during the budget on the grounds that they announced, I guess, a lot more detail comparatively about what these are going to be. So we know there's going to be 12. We know that they are going to be genuinely in the northern part of the UK, as well as one in the devolved countries. We are not aware yet, I guess, of what they'll actually represent, but we do know that they're now in the application period for local authorities to apply, because it will be it won't be like free ports where the government will decide what the free ports are. This will be an application from a local authority for an area to become an investment zone. There's then £80 million worth of funding. That funding will represent growth, reduce tax costs, and various other, I guess, reliefs and encouragements for the area. From the payroll side, it's going to be another ERS relief, so comparatively similar to what we have with free ports. And interestingly, from the budget, the threshold has been reduced from its initial announcement of the upper secondary threshold to the same threshold as the free ports, so the 25,000 per year. The expectation, therefore, that it will pretty much mirror and therefore be new employees, I should suspect, Simon, within these zones from the date of confirmation. And then I'm guessing, therefore, we'll also have 4 more NI letters, table letters to manage it in the same way that we have FISNL now for free ports. So where they're going to get the letters from, I don't know, because we're running a bit short. So I think we're going properly into the contracted out ones now. But principally, we don't have a date, but you could possibly expect it's going to be the next tax year, depending how quickly they move. But principally, until we know who has had the confirmation of application, it's a bit of an out there. You can expect there'll be the standard maps, e.g. this is the area that you need to be within. Otherwise, as I said, you do suspect more than likely it will mirror to a degree the free port model, but instead of being separate multiple tax zones around a port itself, it's going to be a singular area up north.
Simon, anything to add?
So from a payroll consideration side, I guess there's an element of for the first year, it's likely that they'll operate similar to free ports. So using I call them the FISL letters, FIS and L. And then in the future year, it's probably going to get its own set. I'm just hoping, and certainly responding in consultation, that I don't want them to set another upper accrual point in law that you have to have separate in softwares. And I'm going to do align some of these things, please. Otherwise, we're going to have 50 upper accrual points at some point or other, all of different values, although they all then declared to be the same. So yeah, interesting times. It would be interesting to know, it's not something I don't think we've got in a poll or anything, but it'd be interesting to know if any of the listeners are actually in free ports or dealing with that. The other aspect, I guess, of national insurance is really on the subject, and that was subject to parliamentary question, was on the use of the veterans' national insurance reliefs. Because I think the prediction of the original impact assessment was that 10,000 employers would benefit from veterans NIC reliefs. And in relation to the parliamentary answer, there's about 459. So it's way down on the original employer expectation of benefit. So only 459 employers so far have actually benefited from the V national insurance reliefs for veterans. So yeah, let's see what happens.
If anyone is benefiting more, yeah, if they've got 78 people online with us at the minute, if any of you are involved in this on the free ports or have information or questions related to any of this, put it in the chat box. It'd be interesting for us to find out. Perhaps you can do that while we run our next poll. Let's get everyone involved again. Poll number 2, do you believe the national living wage increase is adequate? Obviously, this is in preparation for the next section, which is very much about the national living wage increases. But before we get there, I want to find out if you think it's sufficient, or if it should be higher, or if it's too high, or if indeed you are unsure. And if you, while you're filling that poll out, if you are involved in free ports on your payroll or want any questions related to the release and investment zones impact we've just discussed, put it in the questions box. I will ask that in just a moment. But interested to find out here what people's thoughts are on national living wage increases. And in a moment, we're going to find out a little bit more about what that increase is, obviously effective from the 1st of April, what the low pay commission is hinting at. We're going to talk about that as well, and the impacts on benefit packages, and of course, payroll considerations as well. So we've got 78 of you. Hopefully you're all getting involved in this poll. Let's have a look at some of those poll results. Let's see how they're looking. What do we think here? The results are, for those in audio only, we've got 54% say it's sufficient, which is interesting. 35% say it should be higher, 3% saying it's too high, and 8% unsure. So a little bit of a spread there. Richard, what are your thoughts?
So I think it will depend on the company, is my initial view. On the grounds that depending how much money you've got, it will have a different effect on you. As you imagine, we meet lots and lots and lots of companies, and it is a very different and often polar view. Obviously, a smaller business, this is a significant increase this year. It's 9.7% increase on salary, with no sort of form of control over that extra money. But, you know, the other side of the argument is, well, it can never be enough. You know, the principal argument of the government is to hit 2/3 median. If you look at the TUC, they actually want it to be 3/4 median. So, you know, it's a different answer for a different person. If it's you that's affected by it fiscally, then you want as much money as you can get. But obviously, if it's affecting you financially as a company, then it can be a real challenge, with the extra costs, obviously, that an employer is currently facing due to, obviously, areas such as energy, transport, and so on and so forth. So I think it is such a variant and sort of directed response to this based on your situation.
Yeah, I probably agree. It's hard not to agree with that, really. It's definitely on how it impacts either you as an individual or family, and you as a business are going to have slightly different responses there for sure. Well, let's jump into this section then. Simon, if you can tell us, as we see the subjects come up, little bit about what the increase is when it impacts us, and what they're hinting at as well, although we do give the game away when you see the slide. Simon, take the floor.
Yeah, sure. So you'll know that for those aged 23, it's risen 9.7% to £10.42. And the advertising is a little bit inaccurate, I'd probably say, because it was telling everybody's being told that that rise applies from the 1st of April. Well, it kind of does, but doesn't. So it applies to the first pay reference period that starts from the 1st of April or not. So a lot of people are going to be disappointed in March, because if their pay reference period, in April, because if their pay reference period starts in March, they're just paid in April, it could well still be the old rate and not the new rate. It's not point of payment, it's not even point of work, it's where's the start of the pay reference period that triggers it in. For 21, 22-year-olds, £10.18. For 18 to 20, £7.49. Under 18s, £5.28. And apprentices have been brought up to the under 28 rate as well at £5.28 as well. The other indication, of course, I'm probably jumping ahead there, Nick, is the low pay commission. Maybe we'll leave that for a while, but it does have impacts, and I think that's the real hotbed of discussion, is what's the impact elsewhere. As a general principle, the rise is fine, prices going up, etc. Will it drive inflation? Don't know. Or can it be affordable? I think the low pay commission report tends to imply that it's not actually impacting the job market in the fact of making it shrink or increasing redundancies, but we'll see what happens over time.
Sure. Richard.
No, I think it is. I think there is obviously further change to come. We have at least another year of the current model, depending obviously on what happens next year in the elections. But principally, you know, it is a contentious subject. It always will be, depending on who you are, where you are, what your position is fiscally in relation to business. But you know, it is on a path that is linked almost, but not entirely, to inflation. So, you know, the low pay commission look at so many other areas, whether it be average earnings, actual cost of goods. So it is pretty much means tested. But I think it's just really the net effect, because I guess the other way you have to look at it is it's not just your people on the national minimum wage that are affected. If you are increasing your national minimum wage people by that percentage, by rights you've got to increase everybody else by at least some as well. So the net effect is cascades up through the business. And I think that's the other area, obviously, that would cause the bigger concern.
Sure. So what are the main impacts? I don't know, there may be an impact on pensions as well, Andy. If there is, please do come in. But what are the impacts on benefits packages and payroll considerations?
Well, the challenge is lots of benefit packages are constructed in a way to give tax and NI efficiencies. And over the years, because most pay rates have probably been had a little bit of a distance to the national minimum wage, or now the national living wage, but they've rapidly increased where wages haven't. So they've now caught up. So a lot more people are now on living wage levels that wouldn't have been 3 or 4 years ago. They'd have been above. So they had a level of cushion to salary sacrifice, or operate optional remuneration arrangements, or flex scheme, and that has impacts. So now it may have been I could, and this touches on Andy's area as well, I could have salary sacrificed my 5% pension contribution, earned 5% less to benefit from the NI relief, but I haven't got 5% to sacrifice, because if I do, I'll have dropped below national living wage levels. So what does the employer do? And that's where it starts to get in. So I got a bike. I got a bike 6 months ago, and now my earnings levels aren't sufficiently high enough to cushion the monthly payment to the employer that they're demanding And what about my childcare vouchers? And I did a holiday buy and all those sorts of things. And there's an element of thinking, actually, are employers more likely to be in breach of national minimum wage law requirements? But national minimum wage extends beyond that, Nick, because sometimes say, oh, we're all good, we're paying the rate, but are they paying for that half an hour meeting after work when they all got together? Are they paying for some of the travel?
Sure.
And they're required them to wear black shoes and a black shirt. Are they paying for that? So there is lots of things, nothing to do with work time, well, that you pay for, that count as work time for national minimum wage purposes. You know, will you do that little bit of, you know, there's an online course, can you do that tonight when you're at home? You need to do that on, I don't know, health and safety issue or something for work related. But no, we're not paying you for that. There's an element of lots of employers, I think, are going to find themselves breaching minimum wage law, and they didn't even think they were.
Yeah, and to escalate that even
Andy,
further,
anything to add?
I was going to say, I think it's a bit of a drag, sorry, Nick. I guess to escalate that further, it's this change in work. So we talk about understanding catalogue and knowing work hours. Hybrid working makes that even more of a challenge. When are your staff actually working when they're at home? What hours are they actually doing? Are they doing a day's work, having their dinner? Because they watch Homes Under the Hammer in the daytime, they're turning their laptop back on at night and working till 9-10 o'clock at night. How are you controlling that? How do you know that? And especially, for instance, with a lower paid staff, that could therefore have an enormous effect on the calculation of national minimum wage against hours worked. So the whole area of control becomes substantially harder when it comes to hybrid working.
Sure, Andy. Any impact on pensions we need to consider here before we move on?
Yeah, well, Simon's right, and Richard as well, in terms of, you know, if national minimum wage in effect has gone up, and therefore if your salary sacrifice means you can't do that anymore because you will go below the national minimum wage, and it is per period, it's not only rate based, is it? That's what we're saying. So you need to take people out of salary sacrifice and make them and put normal contributions in place, and that needs to be done for your April payroll. And of course, I mean, I think we've touched on this before as well. Of course, if national minimum wage has gone up, that is a pay increase, and watch out for Alabaster kicking in as well for your maternity calculations. And don't forget, employer contributions during maternity leave are based on the pay the person would have had. So Alabaster does have an impact, and so yes, as always, it's never straightforward, is it? It's one little bit all of a sudden becomes, wow, there's a lot of bits involved. That's why payroll is so wonderfully complex and challenging.
We know payroll is complex. That's why we're here, right? And for those outside of payroll may not realise it, but we do. It's complex. It's complex. Well, I've got a couple of things that have come in. One's an observation. Jeanette, just to say there still needs to be an element of trust when it comes to working from home. So that was an interesting observation there from Jeanette. But also a question comes in from Paul. Does the panel think that national minimum wage legislation is out of date and needs to be updated to make it clearer for employers to understand and remain compliant?
Potentially, but I think there's challenges there, because I guess the national it's changed department. So it used to be the Business and Energy Industrial Strategy. Now they've changed, so it's now the Department for Business and I forgot what else, at Trade, isn't it? So it's the DBT. That's the department that looks after national minimum wage law. They'll probably say they think it is, but what's happened over the years is we've come up with convoluted schemes to get round tax and national insurance reliefs, and that's where the challenge is. So we're kind of pretending that things weren't earnings to avoid paying tax and national insurance, legitimately, not realizing that that therefore reduces contractual earnings, especially when we reflect the original quite often in pay and then reduce it down to affect the tax and national insurance. So in some ways, they'll probably say, well, that's the construction you've come up with, not the law. Now, should the law be changed to change that? Maybe it should, and I think there are pleas and there's lobbying going on to actually allow salary sacrifice to take place, for example, without affecting minimum wage, because it benefits the employee. But the review that happened, I'm going to say a couple of years ago, but we've had COVID for 2.5 years, so it must have been at least 5 years ago. The minister at the time, but the ministers have all changed, was no, we're not changing it, because there's an element of they could be used as means for employers to exploit workers, and they're there to protect the worker. So, but it would be interesting to have it changed. I think some of the audit requirements are over officious on interpretation, maybe, because you can't have a pay frequency longer than a month. You've got to pay it within a certain time. If you've breached, you can't undo the breach. You can only top up the payment. You're still in breach. There's all these sorts of things, but it would be nice to have it more practical in its application. But it's a tough one. But the other impact, and Andy talks about, you've got to change the pension scheme. There's an element of some we see operates called flipping. So they'll change it to an employee deduction instead. But the problem with employee deductions is, who are you paying? So if I've got a bike from my employer, even though it's a third party, and it's a loaned bike to me as an employee, and I'm now paying it, who am I paying? And I think the BA view is you're paying the employer. So you think you got around national minimum wage breach, do you? I don't think you have, because any deduction for the benefit of the employer reduces national minimum wage pay. The breach hasn't gone away at all. You've just changed it and taxed the individual and charged them national insurance. The breach is still there. So there's an element of being very careful. So it is overly complicated, Nick, as you're suggesting. Will it be simplified? I don't know that it will be, because I think they'll say it's there to protect the worker from exploitation. And would simplification make it actually easier to be exploited? Don't know.
Sure. I know Richard's done a lot of training on this. Anything you want to add on this element, Richard, or should we move forward?
Yeah, so the thing Simon was talking about the last review, it came out in December 2019. It was just before COVID that they re-announced. So in principle, it was almost an announcement because they made a bit of a mess of confirming the rules around fines, because they basically stated that if you were incorrect due to salary sacrifice, it was a slap wrist rather than a fine, and it kind of made people believe that you could therefore do it. And there was a number of cycle to work providers who basically stated you could for a period of time. So on the back of that, in December 2019, there was I guess a comparatively short output to say the rules haven't changed in that respect. I think really, as Simon quite rightly said, the issue here is a number. Number one is the reduction of eligibility to certain benefits depending on your income. So you almost turn areas into elitist benefits. We could use, for instance, EV cars, prime example. An EV lease is quite expensive. It's going to be £300, £400, £500. It therefore hugely limits those who could basically be in that scheme, which could be seen as unfair. It could be seen as elitist. But I think the bigger area, and probably the more important, is pensions. They are desperately trying to encourage more and more saving to pensions. We've seen the auto enrolment bill, where we're looking at reducing the age to 18, removing possibly the trigger, all of that good stuff to get more and more people into it. But a prime saving and a prime benefit to the employee and the employer is salary sacrifice. And if all of a sudden half of your people can't, or because of a national minimum wage increase, a large number who possibly could now can't, then surely that's a negative thing, because it is reducing the value of the pension and, I guess, the appetite for that pension scheme with both the employer and the employee.
So I have a suggestion on this one in relation to pensions, Nick, and it's something kind of I've put through the CIPP as well, is the reason we have salary sacrifice pensions is to get the NI relief, because pension contributions don't get NI relief, they get tax relief. There's an element of, why don't you just give them tax and NI relief for an employee contribution? Then you wouldn't need anything, because an employee contribution doesn't reduce pay for national minimum wage purposes. And it's sort of, we kind of have that for share incentive plans, that you get NI relief. Why don't we extend the NI relief to other things, so that it's an equitable, even playground where we can all play the game? And that would do away with some of these challenges, because it wouldn't matter what your earnings levels were if it was related to an employee contribution, because you wouldn't need salary sacrifice, because you get the tax and NI relief regardless. But see if that one's
sensible.
I think I have one further angle
Go
on this one, which can be comparatively short. As a process, as a model, as a area of guidance, it has changed so much that I think if Bayes did do one thing, it would be to review the guidance and rewrite it. Whether you've been involved in it or not, and I have, because I've been working with some payroll providers on automated solutions, it is a total rabbit hole, the guidance on national minimum wage. A example, if you are looking at cumulative annual hours and reaching your annual hours prior to the end of the tax year, which will affect national minimum wage paid staff if they are not paid for the extra hours they do. I dare anyone to trawl through the guidance on that, and it's substantial pages, and one floats to another, and actually get to the end and understand it. It took me, I think I know a little bit about payroll, it took me ages just to decipher it. So I think Bayes aren't helping themselves with the guidance they provide. And I'm sure Simon won't disagree.
Well, especially when the HMRC manuals are totally different.
That's made out. There you go. So that's a payroll thing that it goes over my head, but everyone here laughs. I'm sure the panel is watching and looking the same. So there we go. Let's have a look at the future of pay things. That kind of relates to Paul's question in relation to whether things will be simplified. A big question, and probably not one we can completely get through in the space of a few minutes here on PQT, but a lot of discussion. Me and Simon have had a lot of conversations offline as well about the future of pay and whether or not we're going to see the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle. And of course, we've got lots of innovative new solutions coming into the marketplace. People are calling it on-demand pay, pay on demand, or earned wage access, and all these different terms we need to get our heads around. Effectively, all pretty similar things as far as I'm aware. But we're having a potential movement away from the pay cycles as we understand them, with a move for many companies, or certainly the suppliers pushing the narrative anyway, of the fact that employees are going to want in the future access to pay on demand, where they can choose their payday or even earn in real time. Is this the future of pay, Simon? Are we going to see the dissolution of the monthly pay cycle as we see it here in the UK? Is pay on demand, as you see from a service provider perspective, I know it's a solution SD Worx, I believe, offer. Are we seeing rapid uptake? Take the floor.
It'd be nice to. You'll know I've been working on pay on demand, if I call it pay on demand, for probably 15 years. And my master's degree, when I did the dissertation, was on the use of the internet. At the time of writing that, which is back in '99, the uptake of the internet for anything to do with payroll was about 6%. Whereas these days, you'd probably say, what interaction has internet exchange of data got to do with payroll? And I'd probably argue it's 100%, as opposed to those 24 years ago, when I originally wrote it. And certainly some of the papers I wrote were on, actually, is the pay cycle dead and should it be? I think we're some years away from it. And I'm not sure the early wage access solves that yet either. It's sort of pretends as a middle step to get there, to give that flexibility. But at one time, you know, all direct debits were probably taken out on the 1st. These days you can choose when your direct debit happens. You have it any day, and there's an element of, could I actually choose when I want to be paid, or even have stages? And some of the companies out there have offered solutions, but there's an element of, do we ever get there with payroll? The technology is at a stage where it could go that way, is that you just choose when you want to be paid and how often, and it will pay you. And I'm meaning really pay you, not just access early. The access is kind of a stepping stone to kind of my future thoughts there, but you're right. So they're becoming more popular. I think they're changing. I think the model's getting better. You'll know that I was very suspicious of some in the early days, because I think the driving force was the fee. And the fees have dropped drastically, even to the extent that these days the employer pays any fee if there is one, so there's no cost to the employee, because that then goes into minimum wage issues, etc. And it's interesting, the HMRC views that have come out recently, but I'd like to think that we don't need a pay cycle. You just pay people when they've chosen, and all we're doing in payroll is ticking along. Now, some of the payroll managers are going, oh, you mean I'm not going to do the holiday on the 15th to the 17th of the month? I'm not going to do the tax codes from this. I think as an industry, we like the cycles. Do we really need the cycles, or could we move to a model that just breaks it and we're just dealing with the transaction of the day? Now, I think some cycles will always be there to an extent, but there's an element of, could we actually give a freedom that actually pay yourself whenever you like, and it's true pay, not an advance, but actually true pay. So that's where my head's been for the past 15 years, but will I see that in my lifetime? I'd like to think I would, but I think the technology is there where it could end up that way.
Yeah, there's certainly been some shifts. I think initially when we first started talking about this, Simon, we were coming away from the days of Wonga, and it was kind of the pay on demand was a short-term loan, and it was a little bit more convoluted and complex than it is, of course, these days. Sorry, Rich, you were going to come in there, but I think those that were perhaps initially reticent may not be aware of how far the technology has moved on and how actually the solution could work in modern day terms as to how it used to work. Perhaps, Richard, you can bring some of that to light if you've got some experience here.
Yeah, I think behaviourally, the world is changing. These blooming millennials again, we've talked about these before, haven't we? Where the expectation has changed in the world. You know, everybody wants everything now, yesterday, delivered, Uber collected, whatever it may be. So just the general mentality's changed. I think in the industry, and we certainly see it because we've had multiple panels, multiple meetings on this subject. The issue you have with it to a degree is it's a very polar argument. You will have one side of the argument that is, you're encouraging debt, and they won't be moved on that. You know, why would we want to give people money earlier than they would normally get it, on the grounds they may not have enough at the end of the month, and they will continually be in that debt? While the other side will look at it and go, well, actually, you're kind of in a bit of a blinkered world, because whether you like it or not, if they want that money, they're already getting it. The difference is, at the moment, they could be getting it from Billy McGroggin down the road at 999.99%. So surely it is better that it's controlled, it's free, you have awareness of it, and therefore we can move into the probably biggest watchword area at the moment, which is financial well-being, and actually support the individual. So it's very, very bipolar. The big difference, I think, is going back to Simon's point, that if it was actually genuinely real-time pay that was controlled and decided by the individual, then none of this, well, half of that argument's gone. So I think is, what is pay on demand today in comparison to what does Nirvana look like? And it will definitely happen in Simon's life because he's only 23. So, I mean, I think within the next sort of 70 odd years we'll be sorted, Simon. But in principle, it's at the moment, Yes, I'm trying to help. At the at the moment, it isn't truly what it should be, and therefore employers especially are very reticent to change to a debt model. But also, you've always got the, well, we've always done it this way. We've always paid people that way. So why would we change? I think the bigger difference.
But then it may not be
seen,
their decision, of course, Richard.
No, I agree. But I think one of the areas we have seen
This is
people
being led
changing
by this is being led at boardroom level, right? And ultimately, I see it from the recruitment side of the fence, which is employees have a very strong voice on what they want, and if a company doesn't bend over to take on the requirements that they're demanding, then employees are going to walk out, as we've seen with the Great Resignation, and they won't stay, or you won't be able to attract them. Well, so I think if as much as payroll people may not want it, they may not be their choice.
Well, this is the other area which I would have gone on to, I think, actually, is depending on your work type. In some environments, it's now a non-negotiable. So hospitality, retail, a lot of them will already offer this solution, whether it be wage mate or whatever it may be. And if you don't offer it, it could be a significant reason why somebody wouldn't work for you, because the other ones do. So I think there is huge pressure within certain industries. But I think the other area that we are seeing is people are reconsidering their pay frequencies. So where you've been monthly, actually we can alleviate a lot of this issue by going to weekly. And I think we've seen a chunk of that happen as well, because then you are giving them pay more regularly and therefore possibly assisting there too. So it's an enormous subject. We could talk for 6 hours on it easily. Yeah. So
good. I can see Simon nodding though. Simon, what are your thoughts here? Anything you'd like to add? Big subject.
Well, I think I think Richard's going along with my nirvana really and dream there, thinking, but there is an element of, even if you're stuck with a monthly cycle, why can't someone choose to be paid on the 16th or the 18th or the 20th or the 25th? Choose your monthly cycle. You do that with your mortgage these days. All mortgages aren't taken out on the 1st, which they would have been 30 years ago, sort of thing. It's sort of choose, but even then, yeah. So I think the software industry could be ready to support this. There's an element of whether we as a payroll industry are ready for it. And I think our cultural difficulty will be changing our cycles to be not so. Today is this day, tomorrow is overtime, today after is holiday, the day after is sickness.
Back of that, just been put in the chat here, Simon, where it says an individual, Joanna, said if pay and demand comes in, it would be a step too far for me and time for me to change careers. And I think that kind of links to what you were saying. Companies are going to be pushing this narrative, particularly on the software and service side of things. Will it be a step too far for the payroll professionals to be able to handle that would be a big cultural shift really in the way that payroll is managed? So be an interesting thing to see as it comes through. What I will say is, from my experience on the recruitment side of things, it's a narrative that's being very much pushed by those that are in the sales side of this process, those that offer the solution and therefore want their clients to take it up, because obviously there's financial gain to be had there. And I'm not necessarily seeing much of the conversation for those that have adopted it necessarily pushing the rhetoric. And that's not really the people that are using this that are really pushing how it's changed their operations tenfold yet. That said, I think it's my personal view is it's inevitability that this is coming in, because I think employees ultimately will have the final vote, and I think that's something that employees are going to be asking for. We're in a culture now of on demand, whether it's streaming movies, getting your Uber on your phone, or getting your payroll, and I can only, from my perspective, can only see it moving that way around.
Perhaps
a couple of questions have come in.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my dream, if anything, Nick, is that people have the choice to do whatever. So there's a question of whether technology will support whatever you choose to do. And my dream is that actually, if you want a monthly cycle, you can have a monthly cycle. If you want a daily cycle, you can have a daily cycle. It will do either. And that's the real dream, whereas we tend to be polar in application. There's an element of actually we've got the freedom these days.
There's some polarization in in my questions box, I'm going to come to you just a moment, Rich. I know you're eager to say something,
No,
but I'm going to give a little polar views here in the questions box. We've got Joanne's view. One moment, so I'll come to you in 1 second, Richard. But Joanna just said that maybe for her it'd be time to change careers. And yet Jess has mentioned, I would love this for our employees. I think it'd be more difficult to persuade our accounts team and board, but this would be a fantastic acquisition for us. And another comment from Therese that says, business cash flow could stop pay on demand, though, i.e. not having the money in the bank to enable payments to be accessed, which is what Richard was referring to. Sorry, Richard, back to yourself, sir.
No, I was going to be facetious and offer a new service called Uber Payroll. That's going to be my future.
That's offering taxis for people that want to leave the career when it comes in, or
yeah.
All my staff will be self-employed.
There's a bullet point here on annualized contract growth and transactional payroll. I'm not quite sure what this is referring to, but I think it for those that do, I think this comes from Simon's something that Simon wants to raise. So I wonder if we can just touch on that before we open our last poll for the day, Simon.
Yeah, I'll have to rack my brains to remember what this was. Yes, there's a lot more short-term contracting going around, so there's an element of thinking, how are we coping with that? So annualized contracts growth. So yes, you haven't got a full-time job for life, as it were, or until you resign, but you've got a 1 year, and in a year's time you take out another year, and in a year's time you take out another year. So yes. Transactional payroll, I think we've probably discussed as part of this thing, but sure. Certainly it's always been sort of one of my dreams for actually trying to get a true transactional payroll out there that can do anything.
Yeah. But I think we've mentioned this before. The the idea that software could do everything for you is kind of a good thing, right? It allows us to focus on more strategic tasks and do other things. Interestingly, someone said, I won't give the name away, but someone spoke to me at a recent payroll event that they thought the word payroll needed a rebrand, and maybe we should name it as pay on demand comes in. It was from the software provider side, so they're pretty sure this is going to be brought in by every payroll in the country. But they were saying maybe when it does, we should change the industry to be called pay time managers instead of payroll managers. When I brought this up to some payroll colleagues, they were not in agreement, shall we say. But interesting that some of the people are thinking that way around. And also Jess just mentioned here, Richard, that you should copyright Uber Payroll right now. So
my bigger concern actually though is all Simon dreams about is payroll. That's my real worry here.
Well, my worry is you've only just found this out now, Richard. This is common knowledge for everyone else that knows Simon.
Exactly. Payroll is sexy. That's why I don't, I wouldn't go for pay time. I'd have to fall in love with something else then.
Yeah.
Payroll's the thing, isn't it? What's wrong with payroll?
Let's see if we can get it trending. Payroll is sexy. Hashtag just been to PQT. Hashtag yes. Payroll is sexy. Right, let's go into poll number 3 then, which is what is your opinion on pay potentially becoming more transactional? So that'll link some of this together. But thank you everyone for being so involved in this conversation. Lots of points and questions and things coming into the questions box here. Keep them coming in. I love to read them out as they come through. Options here: positive, it offers more flexibility. Negative, it complicates payroll management. C, unsure, I need more information. And D, not applicable to my organization, in brackets, yet. I think in relation to the more information, going back to the pay on demand element, I think this is something where more information is needed because the information has advanced so much on this from where it was, even if only a few years ago, to where it is now. So maybe worth everyone just having if you're not up to speed, just getting up to speed with where things are in the current state of play of things. In a moment, we're going to jump to a pensions update. Andy's been waiting very patiently in the wings there to tell us all about the latest updates in pensions in relation to lifetime allowances, annual allowances, exceptions, and a new corporate plan. So we'll get to that in just a moment. So thank you, Andy, for your patience on the panel. But for the meantime, let's have a look at these poll results. So for those listening in audio only, we've got 10% say positive, it offers more flexibility. 33% negative because it complicates payroll management, 45% need more information, and 12% not applicable to my organization yet. I think I asked Richard last time, so I'll come back to you, Simon. What are your thoughts on these results?
I think probably as I'd expect, to be honest, Nick, and it also reflects back and go back to 1999 when I was doing the master's dissertation on the use of the internet. Similar statistics would have probably come up then on the positive, negative, unsure, if I asked the question of whether the internet would ever be used by payroll. And so I think it's very much aligned, but I think that's just a reflection of the day. But I think this is where it's exciting. So, you know, Apple came up with an idea that we hadn't really come up with. I remember, you know, you think, what was a mobile phone for? It was for making phone calls, wasn't it? Who makes a phone call these days on a mobile phone? It's kind of, you do everything else on it, don't you? So I think this reflects a reality, but I think it but has some positivity in it because it's showing a trend change.
I think potentially the biggest thing that's really going to impact, which is, you know, we've just seen the introduction of open source generative AI to the masses, and some people have very intelligent solutions coming on the back of that. And I think it's probably the biggest game-changing thing that's hit the technological industry for a long, long time. So I'll be interested to see what we're talking about in relation to what open source AI can be offering the payroll industry, and perhaps 6 short months away, I think we'll start seeing some new things appear. Pay on demand, I'm sure, will be in that conversation as well. Louise has just made a comment on this. I won't give the company name away just for parity, but she says that she works with a great solution for pay on demand. So good to hear that one of our listeners actually has pay on demand in play at the moment. In that particular solution, they say they offer advances at a cost of £1.49 per transaction, and then payroll just deduct the advance amount each pay period. So interesting there, of the 70 attendees still on show at the minute, that we have got some people that have a pay on demand solution in play already. So really interesting to see that. But listen, let's jump into pensions for Andy's time in the limelight now. Andy, I wonder if you could bring us up to speed in the latest in relation to pensions. I'm going to let you take the floor in relation to lifetime allowances and more. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing probably is to go back to the pay on demand, really. We just had that unsure how it all works. And I think really, yeah, the example you just mentioned, where you're just doing advances and recovering those advances versus real-time processing of payroll, tax, national insurance and pension, automatic enrollment assessment, putting people into a scheme. How many times will you allow that real-time to take place in the month or whatever it might be? So I can understand why people have said unsure, a bit more information needed, because if it goes beyond just in an advance, a loan which you recover, then you are talking about tax, national insurance calculations every time you do a true payment, and you need to be doing automatic enrollment with that. So if there's 3 times in the monthly cycle, the 3rd time might be when they trigger, because at that point, payroll is aware of the overtime payment going through. So actually it could be really interesting and complex. So yeah, I can agree with the unsure.
I think there is one more thing, if I can, as well, and it's the whole area of universal credit. You know, universal credit is based on the pay reference period and it's returned through RTI. Obviously, advances per se don't affect it, but if we are talking about multiple payments, how is that going to not make universal credit explode? And I think that's the other key area. Sorry,
Uber payroll, taxi for payroll, then there we go. People can't handle it.
Yes, and that's why I think the future is probably choice of when rather than how often. As an order thought process. So the cycle that Andy's talking about is there, but you've chosen when it is rather than the employer's chosen.
That's a bit like the working from home situation, right? We've got people working on hybrid, and it started with everyone doing whenever they wanted, and actually businesses quickly discovered, not in all cases, but in most cases, that actually we need a little bit of a plan here. We're going to offer hybrid working. We want people in the office on this particular day and out of the office on the next, because you try and organise a meeting. I come in on a Monday and you decide to come in on a Tuesday. We miss each other, and it needed a little bit more organisation. So I'm sure it'll kind of, I would imagine these kind of solutions will find their natural way forward, and people have to agree on particular dates for payment. But I guess we'll wait and see. I'm conscious we want to get through the SD Worx Academy launch information. So back to you again, Andy. Tell us a little bit about the latest on the lifetime allowance.
No pressure. I'm going to take 12 minutes.
Do it.
Yeah, lifetime. So hopefully you're aware these lifetime allowance that has been removed. So instead of the £1 million capped been the maximum amount you can have in a pension or pension schemes. That's been removed. The annual allowance used to be 40,000, has gone up to 60,000. That's the most you can put into a pension scheme in a year. There's lots of things around that, so don't, at a very simple level. And if you've drawn your pension already, then was a £4,000 the maximum amount, and that's gone up to 10,000. So you may have people on your payroll, for instance, let's look at the lifetime allowance, who have previously paid the maximum amount they could have paid into the scheme, or their scheme value was at that cap, and they were then given tax protected status for their pension savings. And basically, if they got automatically enrolled, they'd need to opt out to avoid paying more into the pension scheme. So that's all gone. And for some of these people, annual allowance, for instance, you might very well have been giving them extra cash because you could no longer be paying them an employer contribution, for instance, because they weren't allowed to have any more in the pension scheme. So I'm guessing in April you've been busy working out what to do in terms of, okay, do these people want to join the scheme now? So do you need to ask them the question, do you want to come in? Or if they can now pay extra into the scheme because they're not capped by the 40k anymore, etc., then do you start to reduce perhaps a cash allowance that you're paying them as a pension supplement because they weren't allowed to pay anything above the cap, the 40k cap as it was, now it's 60k. So I'm hoping that you've been working all that through, but of course we're still really waiting to hear all the full details. And you did have exceptions. So automatic enrolment said that if someone has got tax protected status for their pension savings, then if they do get automatically enrolled or they get re-enrolled, you as an employer can choose not to actually enroll them or re-enroll them because all they're going to do is opt out. Well, you can still, so at the moment, you can still apply those exceptions. And an individual will need to understand their own position over their pension savings as to determine whether or not they want to go back in or whether it's best not to. And I think for the moment, there's a lot of clarity still needed. So we're still waiting as TPR and DWP. DWP probably waiting on Treasury. And you got all those machinations around the place. And where do people want? Well, they need an individual probably talking to the pension scheme saying, should I restart contributions? So I personally think it's still unclear yet. So nothing's so one way of looking at it is nothing's changed, but it has changed. So leave it with the individual. So that's quite a lot. I don't know if anyone's Simon and Richard, what are your views on what you've heard?
Well, yeah, this is sort of the confusion areas, Andy, and the worry, because I guess these reasons were used for not complying with pensions auto enrolment because they let them off the hook, but the reasons have gone. So there's an element of are they really okay to carry on with those because they don't apply anymore? So yes, it's what do you do about triennial re-enrolment? Do the exemptions exist? And I guess you're saying at the moment it's sort of carry on, but is that open potentially to abuse?
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? But the individual can always opt in. So an individual can opt in, and an employer has to then put them in the scheme. But I think hopefully in a few weeks, whatever, we'll have a much more definite position. But as it stands at the moment, TPR's understanding is these exceptions can still be applied by the employer. Sure. But it's a bigger picture.
It is, but I'm wondering how many employer schemes are actually reviewing this question and interacting with the payroll professionals, etc. Because sometimes I often see, the pension scheme may change its scheme rules and think, well, we're going to change, but they don't actually tell the payroll department they've changed. So it's an element of, who decides, who's the dog, who's the tail, who's the head, who's the tail, sort of thing. And often see those sorts of disagreements, but sometimes even with the threshold staying the same as it was, Andy, there's an element of, well, payroll, you should have left the threshold as it was. And it's kind of, well, you've got to review the rules. You've got to tell the payroll people what to do because they don't set the rules of a scheme.
No, I agree. The scheme, ideally, I mean, there was a large employer spoke to a large employer a few days back, and they have had a couple of their people opt in who are subject to lifetime allowance, but it was their choice, the individual's choice. And I think that's quite important, not to all of a sudden start putting everyone back in. Maybe you could discuss it, you could give the facts, but individuals need to really be chatting to their maybe IFAs, etc., to find out what the best thing for them to do personally is. If they're, because maybe there's things in the background as to why they got that tax protected status that they need to preserve.
Yeah.
Because actually it's
Then I'm
better
thinking,
to keep that than it is to start paying in, so it's a personal thing, isn't it?
yeah. And I think some schemes or some payrolls were applying some sort of 40,000 check, and there's an element of, has that been reviewed? Does it need to be reviewed? Now it's 60,000. So I think there's an element of, the announcements were fairly late. So there's a question of, and the having been a pension trustee, the cycle of pension change can sometimes be, well, we have 3 meetings a year type thing. Actually, has it caught up yet and into the thought process of change?
Yeah, because as I say, some of these, you may be paying people extra allowance because they can't have their full contribution paid in under the scheme rules because they would hit the cap, but that cap has gone to 60k. Yeah, and then so the 240,000 a year to 260,000, if it's off the top of my head, as a salary. So if you're listening to all this thinking, oh, I don't know anything about this, then it probably means you don't have anyone on your payroll who's affected. But if you do, then you need to chat to HR, pensions, etc., to find out what the future impact is.
Right, we're conscious of time. You did a good job there, Andy. You've almost taken up the 12 minutes, but we've got 4 minutes to run through the Academy launch for SD Worx customers. Exciting new launch. Simon, tell us all about it.
Okay, this has been sort of one of the dreams for a little while, and certainly, SD Worx are throughout Europe, some of the largest suppliers in some of the nations there, and they've had Academy for a while, but they've got a new learning development platform which has now come into the UK and offers abilities to obtain online booking to training courses and materials. There's about 20 if I call them legal and payroll type courses that put up there, and more trainings. But for anyone interested, take a look. They're not necessarily free. They are paid for training, similar as Richard's group will do. Ours are probably more solution based to the SD Worx, but not all. We do go deep into things like salary sacrifice, national minimum wage, pensions, some of the complex topics. But just to let you know, it's there. If you went to the sdworx.co.uk, you'll find a little tab marked Academy across the top. Click on there and you can start signing up. They're not always exclusively for customers either, Nick. I think anybody can. A lot of the stuff will relate to the solution, but some of it is general information such as payrolling benefits in kind, etc. So yes,
my understanding is that
opportunity.
they register, they get access to webinars, slides, and course materials before they have to spend anything. So there are also a lot of free resources you can access. So if you enjoy their content,
there as well.
Simon gives you on this show, you can access more of that content and other content after registering there. Whether or not you decide to purchase, some of the purchasing based options, there's a lot of free material in there as well for you guys to access. So more payroll content is a good thing if it's good content, and we know that anything that Simon is attributed to is usually pretty good. So there's my little sell for you, Simon. So while you're there, of course, at sdworx.co.uk, also go to /PQT and sign up to the next session, which will be taking place on Thursday, the 25th of May. Registrations will be open soon. Remember, register to that. Even if you can't make the show, you'll get the slides at the end of that show. There'll also, just a reminder from the start, there'll be a survey sent out to all of you, which will ask you whether there's anything you'd like us to cover off next time. So do put that in the survey response as well, and we'll try and bring that into next month's show. I think that pretty much dead on time here, chaps. So I'm going to say a huge thank you to Simon Parsons, Andy Nichols, and Richard George for joining me on this expert panel. My name is Nick Day. It's been a pleasure to be the host of the show, and I look forward to welcoming you all next month. Of course, all of you, I wish you a very good bank holiday. In fact, there'll be 3 bank holidays you've enjoyed until the next show, as we discussed at the start. So enjoy your holidays. For those that have really taken advantage, enjoy your 2 weeks for 8 days, as Richard said at the start of the chat. And have a great time. Enjoy the coronation, and we'll be welcoming you all back on the 25th of May. It's sdworks.co.uk/PQT. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in a month. Cheers.